one of the most challenging things that you could do would be to draw people. Sometimes you need to just go with it and really try something a little bit different. My name is Aine Divine. I'm a painter and an art teacher. I've been painting portraits for years, as far back as I can remember, and it's what I love to do. I love painting and drawing people. One of my favourite mediums to use is watercolour, and over the course of the next couple of days I'm going to be painting some portraits. The final one will be of myself, a self-portrait, and the other three will be of models. I'd like to have a quick look at the materials I'm going to be using first. We've got some sticks here to begin with, and the ink, watered down Indian ink, and some neat Indian ink. Then we've got a few different size brushes. There's a 6, a 10 and a 12, and then there's quite a big flat brush, 3/4 inch brush that I like to use to begin the paintings. And there's even a brush and a stick here. And then I quite like to use watercolours in the tray. It just means they're all together, and it's easier to get access to the colours. I use a range of papers, from watercolour boards to stretched watercolour paper. But I'll talk you through those in more detail as we go through each portrait. So let's make a start on the first portrait. Okay, my first sitter is Robin, and I like to start by doing some quick warm-up sketches on some scrap paper. It doesn't have to be anything precious at all, so that you just really start off with a very loose kind of, you're hardly looking at the picture actually, it's more just to try and train your eye into looking and to try and get away from any kind of control. I'm using the stick dipped in Indian ink just now. It's actually watered down with, so it's about half water and half ink. And it's just to get the main shapes down on the page and see the position that Robin is in, and gradually sketch things down. This isn't going to be part of the finished thing, obviously. It's just a couple of warm-up sketches. I like to do this because it means that you begin by loosening up, and you're not so concerned about the finished piece. It's more about the process of doing it. I think then you begin to see things more freshly. Now I'm having a look at the corner here where the nose meets the eyebrow. If I was to draw a straight line across from that, it would cut just through the top of the ear. These are things that eventually will become subconscious, I think, but it's no harm to always refer back to parts. Like I'm looking now at Robin's right eyebrow. It looks to me as if it's lower than the left one, and I haven't drawn it lower, so I need to bring it down a little bit. But it's no big deal. I mean, it's only just we shape up there. You could always put a bit of water on it if you really wanted to and scrub it out a bit. I think it's probably one of the best pieces of advice I got was to half close your eyes so that you're blurring what you see, and then you automatically eliminate the details. A bit like the reason that you use the stick. It's just to keep that looseness and forget about the eyelashes and the wrinkles, the eyelids and all that. You want to try and get across the whole form, not just parts of it. And you're comparing everything, even the shape of the hair in comparison, say the size of this part of the hair here in comparison to the chin. Always compare length of line and shapes to the other. Okay. This is ending up being a lot longer now than I had planned. I was actually going to do a longer one on the mount board, which maybe we'll just start with that now. And I want to make some slight adjustments to the way that Robin is sitting too. I have a good friend and teacher in Edinburgh, Damien Callan, has said to me that you know, it's good to have a little bit of action in the pose of the model. I want to create a little bit more tension in the picture so that with the shoulders facing this way and his head coming that way, I think, yeah, and maybe Robin, could you tilt your head a little bit that way? Yeah, and back a tiny bit. Yeah, that's fine. Right, okay. And this time I'm drawing on a piece of mount board, so a bit more substantial than the brown paper. But again, the same, you know, loose quality. I think often it is good to have the shoulders faced away from you if you're posing a model, just to have the shoulders faced one way and the head turned another way. Provides a little bit of interest, I think. Right, so in your mind's eye you might want to see where about the face is going to be placed on the canvas or on the paper before you start. You know, so that you can see the tilt of the head and where the shoulders are going to be, even before you begin. And then you're just drawing, you know, forget it's a face again, and just see a whole series of lines. It's quite a useful way, I think, of looking at the proportions in the face, is to imagine a straight line being drawn. If I was to draw a straight line from this shoulder across, it leaves a kind of a triangle shape here. So I'm quite happy with that, it's fine. And you kind of link up. See, when you're using the stick and ink, it helps because you're linking up the features to one another, because it's easier if you've got ink on the stick to keep going until it runs out. I think one of the most challenging things that you could do would be to draw people, to draw the human face. It's not easy, so I wouldn't say to expect it to be really easy. It is. You know, you have to be quite courageous, I think, to head into it. But the rewards are great if you stick with it. Okay, and you can't really describe tone very well when you're using a stick, so, you know, don't worry about it. It's just, like I said, you could outline the shape of important shadows and just, as I've done there, just kind of roughly sketch in where the shadows are. Okay, I was going to stop there, but I actually quite fancy putting a bit of water on this with some of the watered down ink, because I want to describe the tone on the side of the face, and also it's kind of a good transition, I suppose, to start using the brush now, so that I'm kind of get into the hang of that, as I've been trying to tell myself this is just a way of loosening up. It's not the final piece or anything, so I shouldn't be too concerned. Okay. Do you know what you could do with this? Is when it dries, if it starts to be too much here, which I think this is far too dark there, and these things do happen. What you could do is when it's dulled down, if you're wanting to keep it as a picture, you could always just put a little bit of white chalk there and kind of merge it in, so that it just comes back to the tones that are here. As I say, no, it's always a venture into the unknown. Okay, now it's time to make a start on the watercolour portrait. So we're going to start using colour, and I've got a different support now because of course it's watercolour paint that I'm using, and this is stretched paper. It's 140 pound paper stretched over a Ken Bromley stretcher board. I find that very useful because it wraps right around the board, and you can, you know, you can forget about the edges and everything. It's just a plain white surface to work on. Very useful. And I hate when paper buckles. You know, if you're halfway through painting a face and you maybe put more and more water on and more layers of wash, and if it starts to wave in the middle of the face, it really defeats the purpose of it, because you know, it's just very annoying to try and lay down the shapes of the shadows on top of that. So I always either stretch paper or use really heavy paper that doesn't buckle. This particular piece of paper is a Saunders Waterford, and it's 140 pounds. And it's the knot surface, so it's not completely smooth, but it's not as rough as the rough surfaces. Okay, so I'm happy now with the pose that Robin is sitting in, and I can visualize the shape that the figure is going to make on the page. And one of the things I meant to mention actually is that when you're drawing and painting anything, I think it's useful to have the board vertical and at arm's length, so that you have a good view of the model and you can see the model in the same proportions, in the same plane as your paper, so there's no distortion. If your board is on your lap, you're going to be maybe making a huge head and hair and forehead and a small little jaw, because that's the way you're seeing it. Whereas if you've got it vertical, it's much easier to transfer the proportions properly. Okay, and the other little useful bit of information that I've been given is to stand well back now and again, and just, you know, 10 feet back, and have a look at how it's going. And the other useful consideration, I think it's very important also that you're really comfortable, because this is not an easy thing to do. This is a challenging thing, painting a person, and people find watercolour a challenging medium to use. I think myself, I find it quite forgiving, because once a layer has dried, you can work over it and it dries lighter. So, you know, as long as you haven't used very dark tones in the beginning, you're able to work over things again and again, and layer upon layer, you gradually focus in on what you want it to look like. Okay, so remembering the tilt of the head, I'm going to just lay down some colour here. And I like to use the bigger 3/4 inch brush to begin with. It doesn't really make such a difference if it's flat or round. So trying to look almost at the same time as you're drawing. And that's where the ink drawings came in useful, I think, was because you've already got that bit of a rhythm going, seeing and recording what you've just seen. Now what I've got in this mix here is some, this is cadmium red, which is quite a bright red, and then it's mixed with a little bit of yellow ochre and whatever was left on the palette there, which is just bits of everything really. But it's you'll make this colour by mixing cadmium red, yellow ochre and some sap green. I love using red and green mixes, like alizarin crimson mixed with viridian green is a great colour for the darker shades later on. But the cadmium red and the sap green are quite a good mix for the beginning stages of the portrait. And when you pick up your paint, you can see what the consistency is like, and either dab it onto the napkin or into the water, depending on whether it's wet enough or too wet. Now remember, half close the eyes and work fairly quickly to begin with. Don't worry too much about it. It's not the end of the world if you do lines that aren't exactly right. Try and keep the rhythm going. Remind yourself to keep that looseness all the time. There'll be time enough for details later on. Anything that's on your brush, you may as well use it wherever you can see it. And I think it gives a bit of continuity to the whole thing as well. Not getting too involved in any particular area. It helps you to scan over the whole thing if you stand back. If you're up close, you don't tend to scan the whole painting then. It's tricky to convey so much information onto such a flat piece of paper. Tricky, but very, very rewarding as well. Really challenging, but good. Now behind Robin's right here, the background is a little bit darker. I'm going to go to the Van Dyke brown, which is a lovely earthy kind of a brown. And I'm going to mix that with a little bit of ultramarine blue. Actually, see, red and green are good mixes, but also any kind of blue mixed with any kind of brown also makes a lovely kind of a greyish colour. I don't like to use black, and I think it's a good thing to try and make your own dark colours. So we've got some ultramarine blue mixed with the Van Dyke brown, and I'm going to put it here. The paper is already a little bit wet for the background, so it'll spread nice and quickly for me. You've heard of happy accidents, and I think with watercolour there's an awful lot of happy accidents. It's got a bit of a life of its own, and it's great to let it do its thing. Kind of have to go with the flow with watercolour, I think. All right, again, standing back, noticing that this is very white here. I want it to be light, but I'm also finding that it's maybe too big an area, so brought in the background a little bit. Now sometimes you'll have areas that have dried off in the background and you're layering over it and you think, oh God, look at that outline there now. You won't even notice that at the end, and in fact it might add to it, because you'll have your area of most contrast will most likely be in the face at the end. That's what I tend to do. I tend to try and direct attention to the face, and a way of directing attention is by putting more dark and shade closer together, so higher contrast of tones in the area of most interest, so in the face. And at this stage you can be thinking about the composition as well, and you are eliminating an awful lot of information when you paint. You can't do everything. You can't paint every single thing down. So have a look at the shadows in the picture and see which ones would be worth noting down. And I think this area here being quite dark gives a nice diagonal composition to the picture. I found myself a bit of kitchen sponge actually, which is really useful to just fill in larger areas that I know I won't be working over. So see the background here, I'm just going to use this sponge to put down some darker shades. Just really quickly, because you don't want to be too fiddly, you don't want it to take ages, because then you forget the reason you were even doing it in the first place. You know, just what I was talking about was trying to get the composition so that it's flowing through the diagonal of the picture. And I quite like that dark area up here. It's fairly dark on that side too, but that's not going to help me, so I'm not going to bother painting that in. And you know, as your eye rapidly moves from the person to the page, when you're drawing, when you're figuring out a colour, check it against the person's face as well. You know, even hold up the palette and have a look. Oh yeah, I'm quite happy with that tone. And you know, don't take forever mixing, but because you kind of lose the momentum then. But do try and get it as close to what you see as you can. Yeah, so I've picked up some of that cadmium red and the sap green. I'm making it a little bit darker because when I half close my eyes, this side of the face here is quite dark. Okay, and now there is a bar of darkish colour that runs from the chin through the nose as well. So I'm going to just, this is a sensitive enough bit here because you don't want to flatten the nose, but the blank space in the centre of the face is kind of staring back at me, so we do need to do something about that just now. Okay, so just using the sponge nice and loose, a rough indication of where the nose is going to be in the shadows on this side of the nose because the light is falling from this side. So I wouldn't bother doing any colours or shading here just now because that will probably have the effect of flattening it. And you probably will find as you look more and more at the face that there are areas that are slightly green. Like even here, around this area here, it looks to me to be cooler. Maybe not quite green, but there's certainly a bluish kind of a tinge. So I'm just leaving that for the minute because the paint that's on my brush or my sponge is quite warm just now. And like with the stick, do try and keep a continuity to it. Try and keep your hand moving. When you've got paint in the brush, or paint on the sponge, just use it wherever. You know, keep it going as if you're drawing, as if it's a drawn line. Putting a touch of ultramarine in there now because we're back down in the jumper again, and I don't want it to be the same shade as the face because it isn't. You know, looking at Robin, there's something nice about the way the hands are as well, and another time you might want to do maybe a full figure or something, but I particularly wanted to focus on the head this time because I like the tilt of the head and the hairline, and possibly putting the hands in might distract from that for this portrait. So really, we haven't used a huge amount of colour here, despite me having hundreds on the palette. I tend to just use pretty much the same ones all the time. As I say, it's a mixture of blue and brown and red and green is pretty much what I tend to focus on. Okay, so again, half close your eyes. Now there is a deep enough shadow, isn't there, in the socket of Robin's right eye. Yeah, so when I half close my eyes, the darkest part of Robin's face is both down here, where the collar meets the neck, and a similar tone is up here, where the right eye socket. To describe the hollow of the right eye socket, there's a constant kind of a little dialogue going on in your head. I think it's like map reading or something, following the journey of the shadow. Okay, now here I need to use the brush a bit because we're getting a little bit more. I'm over on the light side of the face, and any shadows on the light side of the face are going to be a bit more important to get them kind of accurate, because you don't want to be painting in on you don't want to be covering over the white paper too much on the light side. Having looked at it fairly closely already, I can see that it's still quite a warm area there, so a little bit of yellow ochre, a bit of cadmium. I think I've reached the point now where I'm going to spend a bit of time working on the face and bringing that up a little bit more, into focus a bit more. So I'm probably just going to get on with it. Okay, I've let the last stage dry, and now I'm ready, using a smaller brush and probably a wee bit closer to the support. I'm ready to start going into a little bit more detail and just enjoying the parts of the face, you know, the features, the kind of little the shaded areas and the areas of shadow that describe the features in slightly more contrast. So the plan is to zone in on the face a wee bit more. I have to really concentrate so that I get the marks in the right place. So you're still referring back to other information around it. Some of these areas are really vital to describe properly, and just around the nose here. So I think I might actually take a little break from talking again and just try and capture these bits as accurately as I can. Okay, so I've done a little wash of ultramarine along the side of the face here, and because behind Robin's face on this side, the area behind him is darker. Remember earlier I'd filled in that area there to try and describe the darker background, and actually it's gone quite a bit lighter since it's dried, so I'm going to reinforce that as well. But I do think it helps to push the face forward, and you begin to see the form in the face a little bit more, I think. It doesn't take an awful lot to describe a part. Like, you could just draw the background and you know that the hair is there. Now I'll soon be tackling the eyes with a similar shade, I think, to the colours that are in the background here. I think I'll just go and do that now. I was waiting for the paint around here to dry so that I would be able to draw fairly accurately. I would keep standing back as well and try to avoid, even at this point, seeing them as eyes and seeing the features as eyes, nose and mouth, and try and still half close your eyes and look at the shadows and describe where they're sitting, where they're placed in the face, rather than just launch straight into drawing them. Okay, so I'm still using the ultramarine blue with a little mix of the brown and anything else that was kind of left on the palette, really, to make this dullish grey. I avoid using black, and I think it can deaden the colours, you know. And it's quite good to try and make the dark colours using the blue and brown mix, or green and red. Sometimes if you're brave with a colour, it can work out well for you. You know, if you just land a colour in a place and it seems to be all right, I would just leave it. Because if you have a tentative approach all the time, it leads to artwork that I think isn't very exciting. It might end up with a picture that looks fine, you know, and it's accurate. But I think sometimes you need to just go with it and really try something a little bit different. See, as my marks become clearer and I become more detailed in the drawing, the colour can become brighter as well at this stage, because you know it's not going to be underneath another colour, and you're not going to have to cover over it. You can just be faithful to what you're seeing and put in these lovely warm tones that you see here and there. And then if you've gone really warm, you can also be a bit more adventurous with the cooler colours. So over here, you can afford to go a little bit more kind of cooler as well, seeing as it's that much brighter on the other side. You know, you can be more adventurous all around, I think. And it's important, if you're drawing somebody else, to make sure that they rest their eyes on something at the beginning that you can then say, can you go back to that point when you're focusing in on the coloured part of the eye towards the end of the painting. So really that they keep looking at the same thing. I've done paintings of people where they've been looking at me and looking away and looking down or looking up, and I think it doesn't make a huge difference. I suppose when somebody's looking out of the portrait, it is more of a formal portrait looking painting. Whereas when they're looking to one side or something, I like to think that it's got a bit of character to it, and when you're actually painting, it's good to try and just see the part that you're painting. Just look at the shape of the colour that you're painting. And scan around the place and see if this colour appears elsewhere, and if it does, just paint it down the minute that you see. Okay, nearly at the end now, just blocking in some larger areas in the jumper. So I've mixed up the Van Dyke Brown and Ultramarine Blue, and I'm just going to block in the jumper. So it gets rid of that white area there. Okay. Deadening down a little bit of the hair here as well, that's possibly a little bit too light. Just indicating some of the folds here as a way of probably leading your eye in, and also, you know, to show that it's not just a head floating in the middle of the page. Okay. A bit of a darker shade there. I'm not wanting to make anything down here too dark, but just to give some sort of a value to it. Right, I think this needs to be reduced down a little bit more, using the background colour to draw the shape of the hair there. Okay, we're getting there, nearly at the end now. As with any painting, I suppose you could just keep going indefinitely. But what I could do is put it away and look at it another day if this was at home, and maybe have a second sitting or something. But just now I'm quite pleased with how it is, and you know, I think we've got enough information down and enough contrast in the face to draw your attention in there. I probably would pick up the brush and do a little bit more to this ear. Might be a good time to just quickly do that, and then there'll always be something more that could be emphasized or pushed back a bit, I think. Because it's more than just I think towards the end, when you are considering the likeness of the person, then it is more than just the features that are involved. It's the gesture of the head and the expression, and even just the shape of things like the hair. All of these things are important in making up the complete person, I suppose, the complete image. Okay, right. I think that's it. Job done. So that's Robin's portrait finished. And we'll move on to the next one.